Taking a solo hike into the Black Canyon of Yellowstone was, in hindsight, probably not the wisest decision I've ever made. I was craving solitude and the raw beauty of nature, and Yellowstone's less traveled paths seemed like the perfect escape. The Black Canyon is a rugged, remote area of the park, with sweeping prairies, dramatic cliffs, and long stretches where you might not see another human being for hours, sometimes even days. That sense of isolation, which had initially attracted me, would soon become unnerving. The hike-in had been peaceful. I spent the day soaking in the silence, the rustle of wind through grass, and the distant cries of birds overhead. There's a unique tranquility that comes with being entirely alone in the wild. But that calm started to shift on my way back. It began with a simple sighting, two figures moving slowly across the prairie, maybe half a mile away. At first glance, I assumed they were coyotes. Yellowstone is full of wildlife, and seeing coyotes from a distance isn't exactly rare. They were trotting in that loping, casual way typical of canines, and I didn't think much of it. Still, I kept my eye on them as I continued hiking. What struck me as odd, though, was how they weren't veering off. Over the course of the next 30 minutes, they steadily shortened the gap between us. They weren't sprinting or charging, just steadily approaching, their movements deliberate but relaxed. I paused occasionally to watch. Trying to gauge whether I was just being paranoid. Around the 15-minute mark, curiosity got the better of me. I stopped and pulled out my binoculars for a closer look. The moment I saw them through the lenses, my stomach sank. These weren't coyotes, they were far too big. Their bodies were lean but powerful, with broader heads and thicker fur. There was no question now, I was looking at two wolves. Eventually, either they lost interest, or I put enough space between us to convince them I wasn't worth the trouble. I didn't relax until I made it back to an area where I knew rangers frequently patrolled. As soon as I found one, I showed them the pictures and described what had happened. The rangers were visibly concerned, not just for my safety, but for the wolves themselves. They identified them as likely being young males, possibly part of a dispersing pack. Their plan was to haze them, use non-lethal deterrents to discourage them from approaching people in the future. The encounter left me shaken but also deeply reflective. I had entered their territory, not the other way around. While the risk was real, so was the wonder. It's one thing to read about wolves in books or see them in documentaries, it's something else entirely to lock eyes with one in the wild, knowing you are just another creature on the land. I came away with a new respect for nature's power and unpredictability, and a strong resolve not to hike alone in predator territory again. It was my first season working in Yellowstone National Park, and I was stationed at the historic Lake Hotel. Being surrounded by such natural beauty every day felt like a dream, and I often found myself exploring the area whenever I had free time. One afternoon, I decided to walk over to the Fishing Bridge General Store to grab a few snacks and supplies. Instead of taking the road, like most people, I thought I'd take the trail that runs along the lake. It looked like a more scenic route, and I was eager to experience a bit of solitude in the wild. The trail started off easy and peaceful, with birds chirping and the lake shimmering nearby. There was barely anyone else out there. And the calmness of the place wrapped around me like a blanket. After a while, though, the path began to narrow. First it was just a little overgrown, but then the trail completely disappeared beneath tall grasses and scattered brush. Still, I wasn't worried. I could see where I needed to go and figured I'd just make my own way. It was Yellowstone, after all. A bit of rough terrain was part of the experience. Eventually, I reached the store, got what I needed, and rested for a bit before deciding to head back the same way. The weather was perfect, and retracing my steps seemed easier than walking along the busy road with traffic passing by, as I neared the hill above Fishing Bridge. I stepped once again into the tall grass, belly high and swaying slightly in the breeze. I wasn't particularly concerned. I'd walked through it earlier without issue. But as I moved forward, something strange caught my eye. The grass ahead of me was shifting, parting in a way that suggested something large was moving through it. It wasn't the wind, this was rhythmic and deliberate. My heart rate picked up a notch. I stopped in my tracks and listened. The grass rustled again. I couldn't see anything clearly, but I wasn't about to walk up on a bear by accident. Remembering my training and instincts, I raised my voice and shouted, "Hey bear." I clapped loudly, hoping the noise would scare off whatever was there. I didn't want a confrontation, I just wanted it to know I was coming, but instead of a bear, two large, gray heads suddenly rose from the grass like ghosts emerging from the earth. Wolves. My breath caught in my throat. They stared at me in perfect silence, eyes alert, ears perked. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. I wasn't sure whether to run, stand still, or drop to my knees. Instinct told me to bolt, but reason kicked in just in time. Stay calm. I slowly reached for my bear spray, trying not to make any sudden moves. My hands were shaking, but I managed to grip the can firmly, pointing it downward just in case. The wolves didn't move toward me, but they didn't back away either. They were curious, maybe a little cautious, but clearly not afraid. We stood like that for several tense seconds that felt like minutes. My mind was racing. I knew wolf attacks on humans were extremely rare, but I was alone, out of sight from the road, and had no real escape route through the tall grass. Every possible outcome flashed through my head, most of them not great. Deciding not to wait for the wolves to make the next move, I began backing away slowly, keeping my eyes on them but avoiding direct eye contact. I didn't want to appear aggressive or threatening. Step by step, I made my way back to the road, the grass whispering against my legs as I moved. The wolves stayed where they were, watching me go. They didn't follow. They didn't growl. They just watched. Once I hit the pavement, I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I didn't even bother trying the trail again. I took the road all the way back to the lake hotel, looking over my shoulder more than a few times along the way. Later that day, I shared the story with some colleagues and a few park rangers. They confirmed that wolf sightings near Fishing Bridge were unusual but not unheard of. The rangers were especially interested in the details and said they'd keep an eye on the area in case the wolves got too comfortable near people. That day left a mark on me, not of fear, but of humility. Yellowstone isn't just a beautiful place to work or visit. It's wild in the truest sense. And moments like that remind you that you're never truly alone out there. You're sharing the land with creatures that have been here long before us and will likely remain long after. From then on, I kept my hikes to well-marked trails, and always carried my bear spray, just in case. It was supposed to be a peaceful hike. The weather was perfect, warm sun, a slight breeze, and nothing but the sound of birds and my footsteps crunching the dirt path. I'd been on the trail for about an hour, enjoying the solitude and rhythm of the walk, when I came around a bend and everything changed in an instant. About 20 yards ahead of me, partially hidden in a tree hollow, was a beehive. But not just any beehive, this one was big. I don't know how I didn't notice the buzzing sooner, but the moment I saw it, I knew I was in trouble. These weren't your average honeybees. They were aggressive, fast-moving, and highly alert. I later found out they were likely Africanized bees, commonly known as killer bees. At that moment, all I knew was that I needed to get out of there, fast. I didn't hesitate. I turned on my heel and started moving the other way, trying not to make any sudden movements that would draw more attention. But it was too late. Unbeknownst to me, they had guards, sentries that patrol the area around the hive and sound the alarm if anything gets too close. And I had just wandered right into their perimeter. Seconds later, I heard the telltale buzzing grow louder, sharper, more focused. A few bees came straight for me, then a few more. Within moments, I realized they were returning to the hive, and bringing reinforcements. Now it was a chase. I broke into a sprint, running harder than I had in years. My lungs burned, my heart pounded, and I could hear the angry hum of the swarm growing louder behind me. I'm no slouch when it comes to running, but these bees were relentless. They didn't just want to scare me off, they wanted me gone, and they were more than willing to make their point clear. The first sting hit my neck. Then another, near my ear. I tried swatting, covering my head, anything to shield myself, but there were too many. They crawled into my hair, got tangled, and stung through the fabric of my shirt. I couldn't stop, couldn't slow down. I just kept running, desperately trying to put distance between myself and the hive. I must have sprinted for nearly half a mile before the swarm finally gave up and began to disperse. My head was throbbing, and my neck felt like it had been lit on fire. I counted at least 24 stings, most of them around my scalp, ears, and shoulders. The pain was bad, but honestly, it was the sensation of those bees crawling in my hair that stuck with me, their tiny legs moving across my scalp. The panic of not knowing how many were still there. It was the kind of feeling you never forget. Eventually, I made it back to the trailhead, red-faced, sweating, and shaking. I must have looked like a wreck. I sat down, caught my breath, and tried to calm my nerves. I was lucky, I wasn't allergic, and the stings, while painful, weren't life-threatening. But I gained a whole new respect for just how dangerous and unpredictable nature can be. To this day, I can still recall that buzzing sound and the eerie sensation of those tiny bodies moving through my hair. It's something I hope I never, ever have to experience again. Since then, I've been a lot more cautious on hikes. I scan ahead. Listen closely, and give any sign of bees a wide berth, because once you've been chased by killer bees, trust me, you never forget it.